I heard my wife through the bedroom door at 2 in the morning, laughing into her phone with a voice I didn't recognize anymore. The kind of laugh that belongs to someone else's joke, someone else's night. I stood in the hallway with a glass of water going warm in my hand, barefoot on hardwood that suddenly felt like foreign territory. Then came the sentence that rewired my entire future in 6 seconds. "He'll never leave me," she whispered, confidence dripping like honey. "He's too scared." The silence after that sat heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I didn't kick the door open. I didn't shout or demand answers. I walked back to the guest room, set the glass on the nightstand, and made a single decision that would define the rest of my life. By morning, I'd already called a lawyer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Nathan, and at 41, I thought I'd built something that couldn't be shaken. I'm a project manager for a construction firm outside Phoenix, the kind of work where you show up before the sun and leave when the concrete's set. I don't manage spreadsheets from a corner office. I walk sites in steel toes, check foundation pours, and make sure the people under me get home safe. My father was a union electrician who taught me 2 things that stuck. Do the work right, and keep your word. Those principles carried me through my 20s when I was wiring panels in 100-degree heat and sleeping in a studio with a futon that smelled like someone else's regret. By 30, I had my contractor's license and a small crew. By 35, I was running multi-million-dollar projects and sleeping in a house I actually owned. The work isn't glamorous, but it's honest. You can see what you've built at the end of the day. Walls stand or they don't. Roofs hold or they leak. There's no ambiguity in load-bearing beams, and I like that clarity. It made sense in a way most things don't. I met Rebecca at a charity fundraiser I didn't want to attend. My business partner dragged me there because we'd donated materials to a community center rebuild, and apparently that meant showing up in a button-down to smile at donors. She was working the event, clipboard in hand, directing caterers like a general moving troops. Dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes that missed nothing, the kind of presence that made a room organize itself around her. When she looked at me, I felt like I'd just been added to a list I didn't know I wanted to be on. We talked by the silent auction table. She asked what I did. I told her I built things. She smiled and said that was the first honest answer she'd heard all night. We went to coffee 3 days later. She ordered complicated drinks with extra instructions and laughed when I asked for black coffee in whatever size didn't require a second mortgage. She worked in event planning, the corporate kind where you orchestrate conferences for pharmaceutical companies and tech startups. She loved the chaos of it, the way 1,000 details could collapse or align depending on her decisions. I admired that. She was the kind of woman who walked into disorder and came out with a schedule. Our first year together felt like building something solid. We'd meet after work, her still wired from putting out fires, me covered in dust I couldn't fully wash off. She'd drag me to new restaurants. I'd take her to sites on weekends and show her the skeleton of what would become an office park or a school. She said she liked watching things grow from nothing. I liked that she saw the vision before the walls went up. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony that she planned down to the minute. No drama, no delays, just vows and dinner and a honeymoon in Sedona where we hiked trails that left us sore and satisfied. The kind of tired that feels earned. I thought we wanted the same things. A house with room to breathe, careers we respected, maybe kids down the line when the timing made sense. I thought stability was sexy. I thought partnership was the goal. For a while, it seemed like we were building that. Then the cracks started small, the kind you don't notice until you're walking across them in the dark. She started working later. Event season, she'd say, kissing my cheek as she grabbed her laptop at 8 p.m. and headed back to her office downtown. I didn't question it at first. My schedule wasn't exactly 9 to 5. I understood deadlines and client demands. But the late nights stretched into weekends. Her phone buzzed during dinners we used to protect. She'd glance at the screen, frown, and type quick responses with an urgency I didn't see when I texted her. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd sigh and say I wouldn't understand the pressure she was under. That stung, but I didn't push. Men my age are taught that pushing makes you controlling. So I gave her space. I told myself that careers ebb and flow, that we'd reconnect when things settled. I focused on my projects, on the things I could control. I poured foundations and framed walls and tried not to notice that the space between us was widening like a gap in poorly measured studs. Then Marcus entered the picture. She mentioned him casually at first. New hire at her firm, background in luxury hospitality, supposedly brilliant at logistics. He came up in conversation the way coworkers do, a name attached to an anecdote about a misordered centerpiece or a venue double booking. I didn't think much of it. People work together. That's normal. But his name started showing up more frequently, always with a little brightness in her voice. Marcus suggested this vendor. Marcus handled that crisis. Marcus made everyone laugh during a site walk. I met him once at a company mixer she insisted I attend. Tall, tailored suit that fit like it was made for him, handshake firm enough to prove something. He smiled with too many teeth and called me brother like we'd known each other for years. I remember thinking he was the kind of guy who'd never worn steel toes in his life, the kind who solved problems with charm instead of work. Rebecca laughed at his jokes louder than she laughed at mine. I told myself I was being ridiculous. The changes accelerated after that. She started dressing differently for work. Not different like a new style, different like an audience had changed. Perfume I didn't recognize. Heels that made no sense for a day spent running between venues. Her phone became a third party in our marriage, always present, always demanding attention. I'd come home to find her texting on the couch, smiling at the screen in a way that used to be reserved for me. When I'd ask what was funny, she'd lock the phone and say it was just work stuff. Just work stuff became her favorite phrase. I tried to talk to her about it once. We were sitting at the kitchen table on a rare night we were both home. I asked if we were okay. She looked up from her phone like I'd interrupted something important. And said we were fine. I told her it didn't feel fine. She accused me of being paranoid and insecure. Said I was projecting my own issues onto her because I couldn't handle that she had a demanding career. That I wanted her to be small and manageable like the projects I ran. The words felt rehearsed, like she'd been preparing that defense for a while. I dropped it. But the unease settled in my chest like rebar that didn't pass inspection. I started noticing patterns. Late texts that made her smile in the dark. Calls she'd take in the other room with the door closed. Weekend work emergencies that never seemed to require my presence when I offered to help. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I did it anyway. One morning after she left for a breakfast meeting, I checked the phone bill online. Pages of texts to one number. Hundreds of them. Sent at midnight, at 6 a.m., during hours when normal coworkers don't need that much coordination. I didn't read the messages. I didn't have access to that. But the volume told a story I didn't want to believe. I sat at my desk staring at the spreadsheet of numbers and felt something inside me go cold and clear. This wasn't paranoia. This was evidence. I called a buddy who'd gone through a divorce 3 years earlier. He listened without interrupting, then said 5 words that changed everything. Document now, decide later. So I started keeping records. Not because I wanted to play detective, but because I needed to know if I was losing my mind or losing my wife. I noted the nights she worked late and cross-referenced them with her company's event calendar that she kept on the shared fridge. Half the time, there was no event listed. I checked credit card statements and found charges at restaurants I'd never been to. At times she said she was in planning meetings. I felt sick doing it, like I was violating something sacred. But the alternative was walking around blind while my marriage dissolved in real time. If you've ever had to become a stranger in your own home to find the truth, you know that particular shame. You know how it splits you in half. The part that wants to trust, and the part that needs to survive. The breaking point came on a Thursday night in late September. I'd finished a long day overseeing a concrete pour that ran past schedule. I came home exhausted, the kind of tired that lives in your bones. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rebecca's car was in the driveway, but the house was dark except for the light under our bedroom door. I figured she was working late from bed, which had become her new habit. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood at the sink longer than necessary. Something felt off. The air had that charged quality, like the moment before a storm breaks. I walked down the hallway toward the bedroom, not sneaking but not announcing myself either. That's when I heard her voice, low and warm, the tone she used to use with me in the early days. I stopped outside the door. Not because I meant to eavesdrop, but because my body refused to move forward. She was laughing. Not the polite laugh she gave clients or the exhausted laugh she gave me when I made a bad joke. This was genuine, unguarded, the kind of sound that comes from deep in your chest when someone makes you feel light. Then I heard her say his name. Marcus. My hand tightened on the glass. I should have opened the door. I should have walked in and demanded an explanation. But something kept me frozen in that hallway, listening to my wife flirt with another man through a door I'd installed myself 2 years ago. He must have said something that made her nervous because her voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. She said she knew the risks. That it was getting harder to keep things separate. Then came the pause, the kind that makes your ears ring because you know something terrible is coming. And then she said it. He'll never leave me. He's too scared. The words landed like a punch I didn't see coming. I stood there in my own hallway, holding a glass of water that suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds, and heard my wife tell her affair partner that I was too weak to do anything about it. She laughed after she said it. Not cruel, just confident. The laugh of someone who'd calculated the odds and decided she was safe. My chest went tight. Not with rage, but with a clarity so sharp it could cut. She was right about one thing. I had been scared. Scared of what leaving would mean. Scared of starting over at 41. Scared of admitting I'd built my life on a foundation that was rotting from the inside. But in that moment, standing outside my own bedroom while my wife dismissed me as a coward, the fear evaporated. It was replaced by something colder and far more useful. Resolve. I didn't kick the door open. I didn't confront her right then. If you're older, you know why. Confrontation without a plan is just noise. I walked back down the hallway as quietly as I'd come, set the glass in the sink, and went to the guest room. I closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and pulled out my phone. It was 2:15 in the morning, but I didn't care. I opened my browser and searched for divorce attorneys in Phoenix. I read reviews until my eyes burned. I made a list of 3 names, attorneys who specialized in men's rights and asset protection. Then I sent an email to the top name on the list with a subject line that felt surreal to type. Consultation needed, possible infidelity, high assets. I hit send and felt the first piece of my new life click into place. Sleep didn't come. I lay in the guest bed staring at the ceiling and running scenarios. How to move money without tipping her off. How to secure documents. How to leave without giving her time to spin the narrative. My mind worked like it does on a job site when a problem needs solving. Step by step. No emotion, just logistics. By the time the sun started leaking through the blinds, I had a rough blueprint. I'd meet with the lawyer as soon as possible. I'd move half our savings into a separate account, which was my legal right. I'd change passwords on everything. I'd document every late night, every lie, every piece of evidence I'd been collecting. And I'd do it all quietly, without giving her a chance to prepare a defense or clean out accounts. If you've ever had to plan an exit strategy from something you built with your own hands, you know the strange calm that comes with it. The grief would come later. Right now, I needed to be tactical. At 6 a.m., I heard her alarm go off in the other room. I stayed in the guest bed, listening to her morning routine through the wall. Shower running, hairdryer humming, the familiar rhythm of a marriage that had become theater. She didn't knock on the guest room door. She didn't ask why I'd slept there. Maybe she assumed I'd crashed after a long day. Maybe she didn't care enough to check. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway before I got up. The house felt different in her absence. Lighter, somehow. Like I could finally breathe without measuring my words. I made coffee, strong and black, and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. The attorney had already responded to my email. Available today at 2 p.m., if you can make it. I confirmed immediately. Then I called my business partner and told him I needed to leave the site early for a personal appointment. He didn't ask questions. Men who've been around long enough know when not to pry. The law office was in a mid-rise downtown, the kind of building with marble floors and tasteful art that screams competence. I rode the elevator up feeling like I was entering a different chapter of my life, one I'd never planned to write. The attorney's name was Richard Bowman, late 50s, silver hair, handshake that said he'd done this 1,000 times. He offered me coffee. I declined. He sat across from me with a legal pad and asked me to start from the beginning. So I did. I told him about the late nights, the phone calls, the distance that had grown from inches to miles. I told him about the phone bill, the credit card charges, the night I'd heard her dismiss me as too scared to leave. He took notes without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me with the kind of steady gaze that doesn't judge, just calculates. Do you want to save the marriage, or do you want to end it? He asked. The question hung in the air like a beam waiting to be set. I thought about it for maybe 3 seconds. End it, I said. He nodded like that was the right answer. Then we need to move quickly. Richard laid out the strategy. File first, file fast. In Arizona, that meant establishing the timeline and controlling the narrative before she had a chance to react. We'd file a petition for dissolution of marriage citing irreconcilable differences, standard language that didn't require proof of infidelity but left the door open if we needed it later. He explained community property laws, how assets acquired during the marriage would be split 50-50 unless we could prove she'd wasted marital funds on the affair. The restaurants, the gifts, the unexplained charges, those could matter. He advised me to take screenshots of everything, to download bank statements, to secure any documentation I had. Then he told me to open a separate bank account that day and move exactly half of our liquid savings. Not more, not less. It had to be clean. We scheduled the filing for the following morning. I'd serve her the papers at home over the weekend, which gave me a few days to prepare. When I left his office, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. I spent the next 2 days executing the plan like I was managing a critical phase of construction. I went to the bank during lunch and opened an individual account. I transferred half our savings, $42,000, into the new account and kept the receipt. I changed passwords on every shared account, email, streaming services, cloud storage. I downloaded years of bank statements and credit card records, organizing them into folders labeled by date. I took screenshots of the phone bill showing the volume of texts to Marcus's number. I backed everything up to an external hard drive that I locked in my truck. If you've ever had to dismantle your own life with precision, you know the eerie focus it requires. You can't afford to feel. You just execute. Rebecca didn't notice anything. She came home Thursday night around 9, distracted and glassy-eyed, claimed she'd been at a venue walk for an upcoming gala. I nodded and asked how it went. She gave me the highlight reel while scrolling through her phone. I made neutral sounds and felt nothing. That scared me a little, how easy it was to pretend. But I reminded myself that she'd been pretending for months. I was just catching up. On Friday, she mentioned she had a full day Saturday, meetings and site visits that would keep her out until evening. Perfect, I thought. That gave me time to have the papers served and be ready for whatever came next. I told her I'd probably do some work around the house, maybe catch up on maintenance I'd been putting off. She barely looked up. Sounds good, she said. I watched her thumb move across the screen and wondered if she was texting him right then, making plans in front of me because she genuinely believed I was too scared to do anything about it. Saturday morning came with the kind of brutal Arizona sun that makes everything feel exposed. Rebecca left early, barely a goodbye over her shoulder as she grabbed her bag and rushed out. I watched her car disappear down the street and felt the final thread of sentimentality snap. I'd arranged for a process server to deliver the papers at noon. Richard had advised doing it when I wasn't home, to avoid confrontation and keep things clean. But I decided I wanted to be there. Not to gloat, but to witness the moment she realized she'd miscalculated. I wanted to see her face when the life she'd taken for granted turned into a legal proceeding. So I told the process server to come at 2 p.m., right around when she'd said she'd be home. I spent the morning packing her things. Not out of spite, but out of practicality. I knew once the papers landed, the house would become a battleground. I wanted to control the terrain. I pulled her clothes from the closet, folded them carefully, and placed them in suitcases I found in the garage. I packed her toiletries, her shoes, her jewelry. Everything that was clearly hers went into bags and boxes stacked neatly by the front door. I left the furniture, the shared items, the things we'd bought together. Those could be sorted later. But her personal effects, the pieces of her that had cluttered my space for years, those were ready to go. It took 3 hours. When I finished, the house looked lighter. I sat on the couch and waited. She pulled into the driveway at 2:15. I watched through the window as she checked her phone one last time before getting out of the car. She walked toward the house with the loose confidence of someone who thought they were walking into the same Saturday they always did. I opened the door before she could use her key. She looked surprised to see me standing there. "Hey," she said, slightly defensive. "I thought you'd be out." "Change of plans," I replied. "We need to talk." Her eyes flicked past me to the suitcases stacked in the entryway. Her face went from confusion to alarm in the span of a heartbeat. "What is this?" she asked, voice rising. Before I could answer, the process server's car pulled up. A woman in her 30s stepped out holding a manila envelope. Rebecca turned and watched her approach with the dawning horror of someone who suddenly understands the plot. "Are you Rebecca Winters?" the process server asked politely. Rebecca nodded, unable to speak. The woman handed her the envelope. "You've been served. Have a nice day." Then she walked back to her car and drove off, leaving my wife standing on our front porch holding the papers that would end our marriage. Rebecca's hands shook as she opened the envelope. I watched her eyes scan the first page, the legal letterhead, the words "petition for dissolution of marriage" in bold at the top. Her face went pale. She looked up at me like I'd just spoken a language she didn't understand. "What the hell is this, Nathan?" Her voice cracked on my name. I kept my tone even, the same voice I use on site when something's gone wrong and emotions won't fix it. "It's exactly what it looks like. I'm filing for divorce." She stared at me, mouth open, papers trembling in her hands. "You can't be serious. This is insane." I crossed my arms and leaned against the doorframe. "I'm completely serious. And it's not insane. What's insane is thinking I wouldn't find out." Her face flushed. "Find out what?" She was still trying to play it, still reaching for the script that had worked before. I didn't take the bait. "About Marcus. About the late nights and the lies and the phone calls at 2 in the morning." Her expression shifted, guilt flashing across her features before she could mask it. That's when I knew for certain. Even if I'd had doubts, that look confirmed everything. "You were spying on me?" she hissed, anger replacing shock. Deflection, the oldest move in the book. "I didn't spy," I said calmly. "I paid attention. There's a difference." She tried to step past me into the house. I moved to block her. "Your things are packed." I gestured to the suitcases. "You can take them now or arrange a time to pick them up later, but you're not staying here." Her eyes went wide, disbelief and fury mixing into something ugly. "You can't kick me out of my own house." "Actually, I can, I said. I talked to a lawyer. Since the house is in my name from before we got married, I have the right to ask you to leave. You'll get your share of assets in the settlement, but this house isn't part of that. She looked like I'd slapped her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she did what I knew she would. She started crying. The tears came fast, dramatic, the kind that used to make me fold. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I felt nothing. If you're a man who's been through this, you know the moment when someone's tears stop working on you. It's not cruelty. It's clarity. I let her cry for a minute, then spoke. It meant enough for you to tell him I'd never leave because I was too scared. Her head snapped up, tears still streaming, but now her eyes held something else. Fear. How did you hear that? I heard you Thursday night. I came home, and you were on the phone with him. In our bedroom. Laughing about how I'd never do anything. She opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no script for this. No lie big enough to cover it. I watched her realize in real time that she'd lost. Nathan, please, she tried again, voice smaller now. We can fix this. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want. I shook my head. I don't want to fix it. I want to end it. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem, I said, and I meant it. You've got friends. You've got Marcus. Figure it out. She flinched at his name like I'd thrown it at her. You're being cruel, she said, trying to reframe me as the villain. I'm being clear, I corrected. There's a difference. She stared at me for a long moment, searching my face for the man who used to soften when she cried. He wasn't there anymore. Finally, she grabbed the handle of the nearest suitcase and dragged it toward her car. I watched her make 3 trips, loading her things into the trunk with jerky, angry movements. On the last trip, she stopped in front of me. You're going to regret this, she said, voice cold now that the tears had failed. Maybe, I replied. But I doubt it. She got in her car and peeled out of the driveway like she was fleeing a crime scene. I stood in the doorway and watched her tail lights disappear. Then I walked back inside, closed the door, and locked it. The house was mine again. The silence that followed felt like the end of a long, exhausting shift. I walked through the rooms, checking that everything was in order. The bedroom felt bigger without her things scattered across the dresser. The bathroom was cleaner without her products lining the counter. I sat on the edge of the bed we used to share and felt the weight of the last few days settle into my chest. I wasn't happy. But I wasn't broken either. I was just done. If you've ever walked away from something that was slowly killing you, you know that strange lightness that comes after. It's not relief, not yet. It's just the absence of weight. I laid back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. How did it go? I typed back 3 words. Papers served. She's gone. He responded immediately. Good. We'll talk Monday. I set the phone down and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The next few weeks moved like a carefully managed project. Richard handled the legal side with the efficiency of someone who'd done this too many times to count. Rebecca hired her own attorney, a younger guy with a reputation for being aggressive in court. They tried to fight the asset split, claiming I'd hidden money by moving half into the separate account. Richard shut that down with bank records showing the transfer happened after I'd discovered the affair and was legally defensible. They tried to claim emotional distress. Richard countered with phone records and credit card statements showing her expenditures on Marcus. Every move they made, we had a countermove. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective. If you've ever been in a legal battle, you know it's less about justice and more about documentation. We had the better records. Rebecca tried reaching out a few times. texts that swung between apologetic and accusatory. I ignored most of them. The ones that required a response, I kept to single sentences. Talk to your attorney. The house isn't negotiable. No, we're not meeting for coffee. She sent a long email one night, 3 pages of apologies and explanations and promises to change. I read it once, then forwarded it to Richard without responding. He said it was good evidence of her trying to manipulate the situation. Everything became evidence. That was the strangest part. Our entire relationship reduced to exhibits in a legal file. I threw myself into work. There's a particular comfort in construction when your personal life is falling apart. The problems are concrete. A wall is plumb or it isn't. A foundation is level or it needs to be redone. There's no gray area, no emotional subtext. I stayed late on sites, double-checking measurements and walking through punch lists until my crew started asking if I was okay. I told them I was fine. Divorce, one of the older guys said knowingly. I nodded. He clapped me on the shoulder. It gets better. You just gotta get through the mud first. I appreciated that. No platitudes, just acknowledgement that this part sucked and eventually it wouldn't. The divorce moved through the system with the mechanical efficiency of a well-run job site. Paperwork filed, responses submitted, discovery requests exchanged like blueprints between competing contractors. Rebecca's attorney pushed for mediation. Richard advised against it unless we were ready to negotiate from a position of absolute strength. I told him I wasn't interested in negotiating. I wanted this finished, clean and final. He nodded with the approval of someone who recognized determination when he saw it. We proceeded toward trial preparation, though Richard suspected they'd fold before it got that far. Most cases do, he said. When people realize the cost of fighting exceeds the cost of settling, they suddenly become reasonable. The hardest part wasn't the legal process. It was the social fallout. Word spread through our circle with the speed of a failed inspection notice. Friends divided themselves into camps without being asked. Some reached out to check on me. Others went silent, either uncomfortable with confrontation or aligned with Rebecca's version of events. I didn't chase explanations. If you're over 40, you know that crisis reveals who your people really are. The ones who showed up with beer and asked no questions, those were keepers. The ones who sent vague texts about both sides and moving forward, those could stay in her column. I didn't have energy for people who wanted to play Switzerland. My business partner Tom became an unexpected anchor. He'd gone through his own divorce 7 years earlier, lost his house and half his retirement in the process. He understood the specific exhaustion that comes from dismantling a life while trying to keep your professional reputation intact. We'd grab lunch between site visits and he'd let me vent without offering solutions. Sometimes a man just needs another man to listen and not try to fix everything. He told me his own story in pieces, how his ex-wife had cleaned out their joint account the day before he filed, how he'd spent 2 years in court fighting over furniture that didn't matter. "You're doing it smarter," he said one afternoon over sandwiches that tasted like cardboard. "You got ahead of it. That counts for something." Work became my scaffolding. I took on an additional project, a medical office complex that required daily oversight and kept me occupied from dawn until the sun set behind the mountains. The crew noticed I was there earlier and staying later, but nobody commented. Construction guys understand that sometimes a man needs to pour himself into concrete and rebar until the noise in his head quiets down. I found myself taking satisfaction in the smallest details. Perfectly level footings. Clean welds on structural steel. Drywall seams that disappeared under a proper mud job. When everything in your personal life feels chaotic, there's profound comfort in work that follows predictable rules. Measure twice, cut once. Trust the process. Do it right the first time. I moved through October like a man underwater. Everything felt muted and slow, but I kept moving because stopping meant thinking and thinking meant feeling, and I wasn't ready for that yet. I'd wake up at 4:30, earlier than my alarm, and stare at the ceiling until the discipline kicked in. Get up. Shower. Coffee. Review the day's schedule. Drive to the site. Execute. The routine held me together when nothing else could. At night I'd come home to the empty house and feel the silence press against my chest. I'd eat standing at the kitchen counter, usually something microwaved or delivered, then fall asleep on the couch with the television playing background noise. The bed felt too big, too accusatory, like it was asking questions I couldn't answer yet. Rebecca's attempts at contact slowed after the first few weeks. She sent one more email, shorter this time, asking if we could talk in person. She said she deserved a chance to explain. I forwarded it to Richard without reading past the first paragraph. He responded within an hour. Don't engage. Let me handle all communication. I was grateful for that boundary. Every conversation with her felt like walking through a room full of exposed wiring. One wrong step and everything could explode. I needed the protection of lawyers and legal language, the formality that kept emotions from bleeding into decisions. If you've ever had to treat someone you love like opposing counsel, you know how strange and necessary that distance becomes. Thanksgiving arrived with the weight of obligation. My parents lived in Tucson, 2 hours south, and my mother had been calling weekly to check on me with the careful concern of someone navigating a minefield. She didn't ask about Rebecca directly, just circled around with questions about my health and whether I was eating properly. I appreciated her restraint. When she invited me for Thanksgiving, I almost declined. The thought of sitting at a family table and pretending to be grateful felt impossible. But Tom convinced me to go. You need people, he said. Even if it's uncomfortable. Sitting alone in that house on Thanksgiving will mess with your head. He was right. So I drove south on Thursday morning, truck loaded with a pie I'd bought from the grocery store, and prepared to perform normalcy for a few hours. My parents' house smelled like roasted turkey and my mother's signature stuffing recipe that involved more butter than should be legal. My father met me at the door with a handshake that turned into a brief hug. You doing okay, son? He asked quietly. I nodded because words felt too complicated. He seemed to understand. We stood in the entryway for a moment, two men who'd learned to communicate in gestures and silences, before my mother appeared and pulled me into the kitchen. She put me to work mashing potatoes, a task that required enough focus to keep conversation minimal. My younger sister arrived with her husband and 2 kids, and suddenly the house filled with the chaos of children who didn't know about adult problems. I was grateful for their noise. It made it easier to disappear into the background. Dinner was easier than I'd expected. My family didn't pepper me with questions or offer unsolicited advice. They simply included me in the rhythm of the meal, passing dishes and making small talk about work and school and the weather. My brother-in-law asked about the medical complex project. I talked about foundation challenges and permit delays, grateful for a topic that didn't require emotional vocabulary. My niece, 6 years old with my sister's eyes, asked where Aunt Rebecca was. The table went quiet. My sister jumped in smoothly. She couldn't make it this year, sweetie. My niece accepted this without follow-up questions, the way kids do when adults speak with finality. The moment passed. We kept eating. After dinner, my father and I sat on the back patio while the sun turned the desert orange and gold. He didn't say much, just handed me a beer and settled into the chair beside me with a grunt. We watched the sky change colors in comfortable silence. Eventually he spoke. Your mother's worried about you. I took a sip of beer. I'm managing. He nodded slowly. Managing isn't the same as doing well, but it's a start. I glanced at him. He was staring at the horizon with the expression of someone who'd carried his own weight for a long time. When your mother and I hit rough patches, he said carefully, I used to think if I just worked harder, stayed busier, it would fix itself. He paused. Didn't work that way. Sometimes things are just broken. You can't pour a good foundation on bad ground. I absorbed that. You think I did the right thing? I asked, surprising myself with the vulnerability. He looked at me directly. I think you did the only thing a man can do when he's not respected in his own home. Walking away from something you built takes more guts than staying out of fear. I felt something loosen in my chest. I'd been carrying doubt around like extra weight, wondering if I'd given up too easily, if I should have fought harder to save it. But my father's words settled something. Respect isn't negotiable. Without it, you don't have a foundation. We finished our beers in silence. When we went back inside, I felt steadier than I had in weeks. The drive back to Phoenix that night gave me too much time alone with my thoughts. The highway stretched empty and dark, headlights cutting through nothing. I thought about the previous Thanksgiving, Rebecca and I hosting at our place, her stressed about getting everything perfect, me helping where I could and staying out of her way when I couldn't. I remembered thinking we'd have decades of those Thanksgivings ahead of us. Funny how fast forever collapses. But as the miles passed, I realized I wasn't mourning the loss as much as I was mourning the illusion. I'd been in love with the idea of what we were building, not the reality of what it had become. That distinction mattered. It meant the grief was for something that had already died before I filed the papers. I was just finally acknowledging the loss. December came in cold, which in Phoenix meant actual jackets and mornings that required scraping frost off windshields. The medical complex project hit a critical phase, interior work that required coordinating multiple trades in tight spaces. I spent my days managing electricians and plumbers and HVAC crews, solving conflicts over outlet placements and vent runs. The detail work kept my mind sharp. At night I started going to the gym near my house, not because I'd ever been particularly fitness-focused, but because I needed somewhere to put the energy that used to go into trying to save a marriage. I'd run on the treadmill until my legs burned and my lungs screamed, then lift weights with a focus that bordered on meditative. The physical exhaustion helped me sleep. I ran into Marcus by accident one Saturday afternoon. I'd stopped at a hardware store to pick up supplies for a minor repair at home, nothing major, just a leaking faucet that had finally annoyed me enough to fix. I was standing in the plumbing aisle comparing washers when I heard a familiar voice 2 aisles over. My body recognized it before my brain caught up, that smooth tone he used like he was narrating a nature documentary about himself. I moved to the end of the aisle and looked. Marcus was there with Rebecca, both of them laughing at something on his phone. She was wearing a jacket I'd bought her last Christmas. The sight of them together, casual and comfortable in the middle of a Saturday errand, hit different than I'd expected. Not jealousy. Something closer to disgust. I could have left. Should have, probably. But something in me wanted them to see me, wanted them to feel even a fraction of the discomfort I'd carried for months. So I walked down their aisle with my basket of washers and made eye contact with Rebecca. Her face went pale. Marcus turned to see what had stopped her mid-sentence, and when he saw me his expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession. Surprise, guilt, defensiveness, then landing on a forced casualness that didn't reach his eyes. "Nathan," he said, like we were old friends running into each other. "Hey man." I looked at him without smiling. "Marcus." Then I turned to Rebecca. She was frozen, clutching a package of light bulbs like a shield. I didn't give her time to speak. "Enjoying your Saturday?" I asked, tone flat. She opened her mouth but nothing came out. I nodded like she'd answered anyway and walked past them toward the register. My hands were shaking by the time I reached the checkout line. Not from anger, exactly. From adrenaline, from the surreal experience of seeing them together in mundane daylight like they were any other couple doing weekend errands. I paid for my washers and left quickly, loading into my truck and sitting in the parking lot for a minute to steady my breathing. Part of me wanted to go back in and make a scene. Tell everyone in that hardware store what kind of people they were. But that wasn't who I was. I didn't need an audience to validate my anger. I started the engine and drove home, channeling the energy into fixing that faucet with more focus than any faucet had ever deserved. By the time I finished, my hands were steady again. The leak was fixed. Small victory, but I'd take it. Richard called the following Monday with news. They're ready to settle. Rebecca's attorney had sent over a proposed agreement that was surprisingly reasonable. She'd take half the liquid assets, her car, her personal belongings, and walk away from any claim to the house or my business interests. In exchange, she wanted the settlement finalized quickly and sealed from public record. Basically, Richard explained, she wants to move on without this dragging out. She's probably worried about her reputation if it goes to trial and the affair details become public record. I asked what he recommended. He said the offer was fair, maybe even generous given what we could prove. Fighting for more would cost time and money and emotional energy. Sometimes winning isn't about getting everything, he said. It's about getting free. I thought about it for maybe 10 minutes. Then I told him to accept the offer with one addition. I wanted a clause that prohibited her from making any public statements about me or the marriage. No social media posts, no interviews, no bad-mouthing me to mutual friends in any documented format. Richard said that was reasonable and enforceable. We sent back the revised agreement. They accepted it within 24 hours. Just like that, after months of tension and legal maneuvering, we had a deal. The judge would sign off after the mandatory waiting period, and by February I'd be officially divorced. Richard congratulated me. You handled this well, he said. A lot of guys let emotion drive the process and end up worse off. You stayed focused. That matters. I hung up and sat in my truck outside the office building where I'd just finished a meeting with an architect. The settlement was done. The marriage was over. I should have felt something, relief or sadness or vindication. Instead I just felt tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones after carrying something heavy for too long. I drove to the site of the medical complex and walked through. The unfinished building, my boots echoing on concrete floors. The walls were up now, the structure complete. Soon it would be filled with exam rooms and waiting areas and all the small dramas of people's lives. I'd move on to the next project. That's how it worked. You built something until it was done, then you started building something else. Christmas fell on a Wednesday that year. I stayed in Phoenix, declining my parents' invitation with the excuse of work deadlines that weren't entirely true. The real reason was simpler. I didn't want to perform holiday cheer. I didn't want to answer questions about how I was really doing or listen to well-meaning advice about getting back out there. I wanted to be alone with the quiet and let myself feel whatever came up without an audience. So I spent Christmas morning at the gym, which was nearly empty except for a handful of other people who'd chosen dumbbells over family dinners. There was something comforting about that silent solidarity. We were all there for our own reasons, avoiding our own situations, finding our own way through. I worked a half day at the site, checking on some finished work that didn't really need checking. Then I drove home and made myself a decent meal, nothing fancy but more effort than my usual routine. Steak, roasted vegetables, a beer that actually tasted like something. I ate at the kitchen table instead of standing at the counter, trying to create some sense of occasion even if it was just me. After dinner I sat on the couch and scrolled through old photos on my phone, something I'd been avoiding for months. Pictures of Rebecca and me from better times. Hiking trips and birthday dinners and lazy Sunday mornings. I let myself look at them without flinching, acknowledging that those moments had been real even if they hadn't been enough. Then I deleted them. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. I needed the storage space, sure, but more than that I needed to stop carrying her image around in my pocket. The new year arrived with the anticlimactic feeling of just another Thursday. I worked, I lifted, I slept. January in Phoenix is deceptively pleasant, cool mornings and mild afternoons that make you forget the furnace that's coming in summer. The medical complex reached substantial completion, which meant punch list work and final inspections. I took satisfaction in seeing the project finished. It had been my anchor through the worst months of my life, and now it stood complete and functional. The owner did a walkthrough with me, complimenting the quality of work and asking if I'd be interested in bidding on their next facility. I said yes. Life was moving forward whether I felt ready or not. The divorce finalized on February 14th, which would have been funny if it wasn't so perfectly awful. Valentine's Day. Richard called to tell me the judge had signed the decree and it was officially done. He'd send over copies of all the final paperwork, but for all practical purposes I was a divorced man. I thanked him for his work. He told me to take care of myself and hung up. I sat at my desk and stared at the phone for a long moment. 7 years of marriage ended with a phone call on Valentine's Day. The universe had a dark sense of humor. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just felt the weight of it settle into place. This was my life now. Single at 41. Starting over. Not the plan, but plans change. Foundations crack. You rebuild. That evening I did something I'd been putting off. I went through the house and removed the last traces of Rebecca's presence. Photos from the walls, the spare toiletries she'd left behind, a sweater in the back of the closet. I boxed it all up methodically, not angry or sad, just completing a task that needed doing. Then I rearranged furniture, subtle shifts that made the space feel different. The couch moved 6 inches to the left. The coffee table rotated. Small changes that signaled this was no longer the house we'd shared. This was my house. My space. I could arrange it however I wanted. I ordered pizza, poured a good whiskey, and sat on the newly positioned couch feeling something that might have been the beginning of peace. The weeks that followed had a strange quality, like I was learning to walk in shoes that didn't quite fit yet. I went through the motions of my life with increasing confidence, but there were moments where I'd forget I was divorced and reach for my phone to text Rebecca about something mundane before remembering. Those moments got less frequent as time passed. I started accepting invitations I'd been declining, dinners with friends, a weekend trip to Flagstaff with Tom and some guys from a previous crew. I wasn't ready to date, wasn't even thinking about it, but I was ready to exist in the world again without feeling like I was dragging the weight of failure behind me. I ran into one of Rebecca's former colleagues at a coffee shop in March. Sarah, a woman who'd been friendly to both of us during the marriage. She saw me in line and hesitated, clearly debating whether to acknowledge me or pretend she hadn't seen me. I made it easy for her. "Hey Sarah." She approached with obvious relief. "Nathan, hi. How are you?" We did the awkward dance of divorced person small talk. "I'm doing well. Keeping busy. Work's good." She nodded along, then glanced around like she was checking for witnesses. "Listen," she said quietly, "I want you to know that a lot of us thought what Rebecca did was really messed up." I appreciated that she said it. Not everyone did. "Thank you," I said. She hesitated again, then added, "For what it's worth, she and Marcus didn't last. They broke up last month. Apparently he wasn't ready for anything serious." I absorbed that information without the satisfaction I might have expected. So she blew up her marriage for something that didn't even work out. There should have been vindication in that. Instead I just felt a distant sort of pity. "That's unfortunate," I said neutrally. Sarah looked at me with something like respect. "You're handling this really well." I shrugged. Not much else to do but handle it. We said our goodbyes and I got my coffee and left. On the drive back to the site, I thought about what Sarah had told me. Rebecca and Marcus imploded. Part of me had known that would happen. Relationships built on betrayal rarely survive the transition to daylight. They need the secrecy, the forbidden thrill. Once that's gone, you're just two people who proved you can't be trusted. But knowing it didn't bring me any joy. It just confirmed what I'd already accepted. That whole situation was toxic from the start, and I was better off out of it. Spring arrived and with it came a kind of thawing I hadn't expected. Not happiness, exactly, but something lighter. I started sleeping better. The house stopped feeling like a crime scene and started feeling like home. I took on a new project, a small commercial development that would keep me busy through the summer. Work gave me purpose and structure, the twin pillars I'd always relied on. I started cooking again, real meals with actual ingredients, rediscovering the satisfaction of making something with my own hands that wasn't made of concrete and steel. Small pleasures started registering again. A perfectly cooked steak. A cold beer after a hot day. The way the sunset looked from the site of the new project, mountains going purple in the distance. Tom noticed the change. "You're coming back," he said one afternoon. I asked what he meant. He gestured vaguely. "You had that look for a while, like you were going through the motions but not really here. You're present again." I considered that. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Good. Took me about a year to get there after my divorce. You're ahead of schedule." We both laughed at that, the dark humor of men who'd survived something difficult and lived to compare notes. That night I realized he was right. I was present again. The fog had lifted. I wasn't healed, not completely, but I was functional in a way that felt sustainable. That was enough. I started saying yes to things I'd normally avoid. A buddy's backyard barbecue where I didn't know most of the people. A charity poker night that Tom dragged me to. A weekend hiking trip with my sister and her family. Each event pushed me slightly out of the comfortable isolation I'd been living in, and each one reminded me that I could still function in social situations without a partner. I wasn't half of something anymore. I was whole on my own, maybe for the first time in years. That realization hit me on a trail in Sedona, watching my niece scramble over red rocks with fearless energy. I'd spent so much of my adult life defining myself in relation to someone else. Boyfriend, husband, partner. Now I was just Nathan. It felt strange and liberating in equal measure. By early summer, the rawness had faded. I could talk about the divorce without my chest tightening. I could see Rebecca's name in an email thread without my stomach dropping. The healing wasn't linear, there were still bad days where I felt the loss acutely, but those days were outnumbered by the good ones. I was building a new life, brick by brick, the same way I built everything else. With patience and precision and trust in the process. The commercial development project was coming together ahead of schedule. My crew worked well together, the kind of synchronized efficiency that only comes from trust and experience. We were building something good. So was I. One evening in June, I sat on my back patio with a beer and my phone, scrolling through nothing in particular. The air was still hot but bearable, the kind of desert evening that makes you understand why people live here despite the summers. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, assumed it was spam. But something made me open it. The message was short. "This is Amanda, Sarah's friend from the coffee shop. She gave me your number. Hope that's okay. Would you want to grab coffee sometime? No pressure." I stared at the message for a long moment. A woman was asking me out. The first one since Rebecca. My immediate instinct was to decline, to say I wasn't ready. But then I thought about what being ready actually meant. Was I waiting for some magical moment where all the hurt disappeared? That wasn't how healing worked. Maybe being ready just meant being willing to try. I typed back a response. "Hey Amanda. Coffee sounds good. How's Saturday?" I hit send before I could overthink it. Her reply came fast. "Saturday works. I'll text you details." I set the phone down and took a long drink of beer. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I wasn't even sure I wanted one anytime soon. But coffee was just coffee. A conversation with another human. That felt manageable. That felt like the next small step forward. I looked out at the yard, at the palm tree I'd planted when Rebecca and I first moved in. It had grown taller in the years since, roots deep and strong. I'd grown too, just in a different direction than I'd planned. Change wasn't always what you wanted, but sometimes it was what you needed. I finished my beer and went inside, feeling something close to hopeful for the first time in a long time. Saturday morning came with the kind of nerves I hadn't felt since I was 19 and asking a girl to prom. I changed shirts 3 times before settling on something casual, a button-down that didn't look like I was trying too hard. Amanda had suggested a coffee place in Scottsdale, neutral territory halfway between wherever we both lived. I arrived 5 minutes early out of habit, the same punctuality that governed every other part of my life. She was already there, sitting at an outdoor table with 2 cups in front of her. She waved when she saw me, a smile that seemed genuine and easy. "I'm a guesser," she said as I approached. "Got you a black coffee. If I'm wrong, we'll get you something else." "You guessed right," I said, sitting down across from her. She had an openness about her that put me at ease immediately, brown eyes that actually looked at you when she talked, not past you or through you. We started with the easy topics, work and the weather, and how Phoenix summer was already becoming unbearable. She was a physical therapist, spent her days helping people recover from injuries and surgeries. I told her about construction, about the satisfaction of seeing empty lots turn into functional buildings. The conversation flowed without the awkward stops and starts I'd been dreading. She asked about my divorce without being invasive. I gave her the abbreviated version, enough truth to be honest without dumping the full weight of it on a first coffee. She nodded with understanding. "My last relationship ended badly too," she said. "Different circumstances, but I get it. Starting over at this age feels weird." We talked for 2 hours without noticing the time. When we finally stood to leave, she asked if I'd want to do it again. Dinner maybe, something more substantial than coffee. I surprised myself by saying yes immediately. She smiled, the kind that reached her eyes, and I felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Interest. Not love, not even attraction yet, just simple human interest in getting to know someone. We exchanged numbers properly this time, no intermediary, and went our separate ways. I drove home feeling lighter, like I'd just proven to myself that I could still do this. That the part of me capable of connection hadn't been permanently damaged by what Rebecca did. Dinner happened the following Friday at a steakhouse I'd driven past 100 times but never entered. Amanda met me there wearing a dress that was simultaneously casual and elegant, the kind of effortless style that comes from actual confidence rather than performance. We ordered drinks and fell into conversation like we'd known each other longer than a week. She told me about her family, parents still married after 35 years, 2 brothers who gave her endless grief, a niece she adored. I told her about my parents, my sister, the way my father communicated in silence and gestures. She asked intelligent questions about construction. Seemed genuinely interested in the mechanics of building rather than just politely waiting for her turn to talk. I asked about physical therapy and she lit up, explaining the satisfaction of watching someone relearn to walk after an injury, the incremental progress that nobody sees except the patient and the therapist. Somewhere between the appetizer and entree, the conversation shifted to relationships. She asked me directly what I was looking for. The question caught me off guard in its straightforwardness. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm not trying to jump into anything serious. I'm still figuring out who I am outside of being married." She nodded thoughtfully. "That's honest. I appreciate that. I'm not in a rush either. I spent too many years trying to force something that wasn't working. Now I just want to meet people and see what happens naturally." Her honesty was refreshing. No games, no strategies, just 2 adults being clear about where they stood. We finished dinner and walked to our cars in the parking lot. She turned to me before getting in. "I had a good time, Nathan." She said it simply, no performance or testing. "Me too," I replied. "We should do this again." We did. Dinner turned into a hiking date the following weekend, an early morning trek up Camelback Mountain before the heat became punishing. She kept pace with me easily, pointing out plants and rock formations with the enthusiasm of someone who actually paid attention to their surroundings. At the summit we sat on the rocks and looked out over the sprawling valley, Phoenix spread below us in geometric patterns. "This is nice," she said quietly. "Just this. No pressure, no expectations. Just enjoying the moment." I agreed completely. For the first time since my marriage ended, I wasn't comparing someone to Rebecca or analyzing whether this could become something serious. I was just present, enjoying another person's company without the weight of my past dragging behind me. Over the next few months, Amanda and I fell into an easy rhythm. We'd see each other once or twice a week, dinner or movies or simple evenings at one of our places cooking together. She never pushed for definitions or timelines. We were two people enjoying each other without needing to label it or force it into something it wasn't ready to be. My friends noticed the change in me. Tom commented that I seemed more like myself again, whatever that meant. My sister asked if I was seeing someone, and when I told her about Amanda, she seemed genuinely happy for me. Not in a matchmaking way, just glad I was opening myself up to possibilities again. The medical complex officially opened in August with a ribbon-cutting ceremony that I attended mostly out of obligation. Seeing the finished building filled with staff and patients gave me a sense of completion that extended beyond just the project. I'd started that job in the darkest period of my divorce, used it as scaffolding to hold myself together, and now it stood as a monument to the fact that I could still build something worthwhile even when my personal life was crumbling. The owner thanked me publicly for the quality of work and handed me a plaque that would end up in my office. I shook hands with the same architects and engineers I'd collaborated with through those difficult months, all of us proud of what we'd created together. That evening, Amanda came over and I showed her pictures from the ceremony. She asked the right questions, understood why it mattered beyond just professional pride. "You built that while your life was falling apart," she observed. "That says something about you." I asked what it said. "That you don't quit when things get hard. That you honor your commitments even when no one would blame you for being distracted." I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. I'd shown up every day and done the work because that's what you do. You honor what you started. We ordered takeout and watched a movie neither of us paid much attention to, comfortable in the kind of silence that only happens when two people genuinely like each other. Fall arrived and with it came the kind of clarity you only get with distance. I could look back at my marriage now without the sharp edge of pain. I could acknowledge the good parts, the early years when we genuinely made each other happy, without erasing the reality of how it ended. Rebecca became less of an open wound and more of a chapter that had closed. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to Denver for a new job, a fresh start away from Phoenix and the wreckage of her choices. I felt nothing about that beyond a mild hope that she'd figure herself out eventually. My life had moved forward without her. I had good work, good friends, and the beginning of something with Amanda that felt healthy and sustainable. By November, Amanda and I had reached a natural evolution point. We were spending most weekends together, had met each other's families, operated with the easy familiarity of people who'd integrated into each other's lives. One evening she brought up the question we'd both been avoiding. "What are we doing here?" She asked gently. "I mean, I know what I want this to be, but I don't want to assume." I set down my beer and looked at her. "What do you want it to be?" She smiled. "I want us to be together. Actually together, not just casually seeing each other. I want to call you my boyfriend without it being weird." I realized I wanted that too. Somewhere in the last 6 months, without dramatic declarations or grand gestures, she'd become important to me. "Okay," I said. "Let's be together." She laughed at my matter-of-fact delivery. "That's it? That's your big romantic moment?" I grinned. "I'm a simple man. But yeah, that's it. Let's do this for real." Dating Amanda taught me what I'd been missing in my marriage. Mutual respect that didn't need to be negotiated. Communication that happened naturally because we both valued honesty over comfort. Space to be individuals while still choosing to build something together. She never made me feel like I had to perform or prove myself. I just had to show up as who I was, and that was enough. It was the opposite of everything I'd experienced with Rebecca, and that contrast showed me how much I'd been settling before. I thought love meant working hard to maintain something fragile. With Amanda, it felt like we were both showing up already whole, choosing to walk in the same direction because we enjoyed the company. Christmas that year felt different. I spent it with Amanda and her family, welcomed into their chaotic, loving celebration with an ease that surprised me. Her parents treated me like I'd always been part of the gathering. Her brothers teased me in the way men do when they're deciding whether to approve of their sister's choice. By the end of the night, I'd been accepted into the fold. Amanda drove me home and walked me to the door. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It meant a lot to have you there." I pulled her close. Thank you for inviting me. For the first time in 2 years, the holidays hadn't felt like something to survive. The new year came in quiet. Amanda and I stayed in, cooked dinner together, watched the countdown on television like the domestic couple we'd somehow become. At midnight she kissed me and said she was grateful we'd found each other. I echoed the sentiment, meaning every word. I thought about where I'd been a year ago, freshly divorced and uncertain if I'd ever feel whole again. Now I stood in my kitchen with a woman who made me laugh, who challenged me in good ways, who'd shown me that not all relationships required constant damage control. I'd rebuilt my life brick by brick, the same way I built everything else, and the foundation this time felt solid. Looking back, I understood what my father had meant about not being able to pour a good foundation on bad ground. My marriage to Rebecca had been built on hope and potential rather than solid bedrock. When the pressure came, it cracked because the base couldn't hold. What I was building with Amanda felt different. We'd both been broken before. We both knew what we didn't want. That awareness created honesty, and honesty created trust. We weren't perfect, but we were real with each other. That realness mattered more than any grand romantic gesture ever could. The best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public vindication. It's building a life that makes you grateful the old one ended. It's waking up next to someone who respects you and realizing you'd never have found them if you'd stayed where you weren't valued. It's the quiet satisfaction of knowing you honored yourself enough to walk away from something that was slowly destroying you. Rebecca had been right about one thing. I was scared to leave. But fear isn't weakness when you face it anyway. I'd been terrified of starting over at 41, of being alone, of admitting failure. I did it anyway. And on the other side of that fear, I found a version of myself I actually liked. Strong enough to stand alone, wise enough to know when to let someone in. If you've been through something similar, you know the journey isn't clean or linear. There are setbacks and bad days and moments where you question everything. But if you keep showing up, if you honor your boundaries and build on solid ground, eventually you look around and realize you've created something worth having. Not despite what you survived, but because of it. The hard lessons become the foundation for better choices. The pain becomes perspective. And one day you wake up and realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're actually living. That's the real victory. Not proving anything to the person who hurt you, but proving to yourself that you're capable of more than you thought. That you can tear down what doesn't work and build something better in its place. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.